So, Killing the Bob is an unusual title for a Unitarian Universalist sermon, without a doubt. Today, it turns out, is an important holiday in the Baha'i faith. Today marks the anniversary of the assassination of one of their most revered leaders. The Bab's full name, and I apologize, this is probably not great, was Sayyid Ali Muhammad Shirazi, but he's typically referred to as the Bab. In 1844, the Bab introduced himself to the world as a messianic figure. He was a manifestation of God, but he was only paving the way for someone that would come after him. To Baha'is, this Bab is sort of like John the Baptist or Elijah, a prophet setting the way for another to come after him. What's particularly fascinating about this story is when it occurred. By 1844, printed text was commonly available and easy to produce. So the Bab was able to write huge amounts of original text that Baha'is still follow today. And this late date meant that written accounts of the assassination of the Bab, even by Western reporters, is readily available. So in 1844, the Bab was developing a huge popular following in Shiraz, in Persia. He was this young merchant and mystic. Like I said, he was mostly announcing the fact that another prophet would soon follow him. And his ministry spread rapidly throughout Persia, and that kind of influence and enthusiasm is never greeted warmly by established governmental powers. The Persian Muslim religious leadership and government quickly opposed his followers, but they finally realized that the only way to put an end to this was to put an end to the Bab himself. In July 1850, the ruler of the Persian Empire ordered the Bab executed. He was to be killed by a firing squad. Now, the regiment assigned to execute the Bab was Armenian, and its commander, named Sam Khan, was a Christian. The commander observed the Bab, and he had heard these stories about him. He was troubled by this task of being in charge of a firing squad to kill him. So he met privately with the Bab. And the story tells us that the commander said, "I profess the Christian faith and entertain no ill will against you. If your cause be the cause of truth, enable me to free myself from the obligation to shed your blood." And the Bab said back to the commander, "Follow your instructions, and if your intention be sincere, the Almighty is surely able to relieve you from your perplexity." So on the morning of July 9th, 1850, the Bab was taken to a courtyard filled with nearly 10,000 people there to witness the execution. The Bab and one of his followers were suspended on a wall about 10 feet off the ground. A firing squad of 750 rifles lined up to shoot him. I know this sounds like tremendous exaggeration, but remember, this story is all recorded by reporters of various faiths from various countries. So the commander gave the order to fire. As the smoke cleared, the crowd was astonished to see the Bab's companion standing alone on the ground, unharmed. The ropes that had suspended him had been cut by the bullets. The young man was uninjured. The Bab was nowhere to be seen. There are disputed reports about what actually occurred after the shooting, but multiple written accounts, even from Westerners, document this story. According to Baha'i tradition now, the Bab was found in his cell conversing with a few followers after that. And the Christian commander in charge of the first shooting, left his post, refusing to play any further role in this nonsense. Then they found a second regiment, and the Bob and his companion were once again placed on the wall. This time, the bullets had the intended effect. The Bob and his disciple were shattered. Some say at that very moment of execution, the entire city was engulfed in a gale that obscured the light of the sun for the rest of the day. I wanted to share this story with you for a few reasons. One is what I mentioned earlier, just the date. And as I was sitting here, I realized that it's near the same time frame that Unitarianism in the United States was first gaining roots. But few of the significant events in world religions have occurred in modern history. The existence of multiple observers from various faith backgrounds makes this story absolutely fascinating. Another reason I wanted to share the story is because it resonates with what we know about the ruling authorities' response to egalitarian religious movements. Whether it's the Bob or Jesus or King or Gandhi, when a charismatic leader rises up with a message of compassion and true justice, the reigning authority will take whatever measures necessary to silence that prophet. The final reason I wanted to share the story of this holiday was to lift up our Baha'i neighbors. I think Baha'i is the world religion that we all know least about. I knew very little before this week. But we have a lot in common. Baha'is firmly embrace science in their quest for the truth. They use the metaphor that I think is great about science and spirituality being like two wings of a bird, two wings that carry the human community forward. Also, like us, Baha'is embrace all religious traditions. They recognize a kernel of truth that can be found in each of them, one prophet to the next. And they understand that more prophets will continue to appear in the future as we grow and evolve. This religious diversity of our neighbors is one of the true gifts of living in the United States. We have a clear commitment to defend that right of religious liberty, to practice as we see fit, and to not have religion imposed on us by our government. We may not know that our Universalist forebears were central in guarding that religious liberty, particularly the Universalists in Gloucester, Massachusetts. By state law in Massachusetts, citizens were taxed to support the local congregational church of the community where they lived. As Universalism was spreading in those days, it found open minds and hearts in some of the folks in Gloucester. Eventually, 61 people left their established congregational church to form their own independent Church of Christ, which was a Universalist church. Then they refused to pay their taxes. Soon after, this new Universalist church building was seized by the government and sold to pay the taxes that its members had refused to pay. But the Universalists sued, and in 1786, they won their case. The case created judicial precedents and established the expectation of freedom from church or state-imposed religion. The Universalists of Gloucester, Massachusetts, helped create a political idea that we kind of take for granted today. Like a lot of rights, I think religious liberty has to get exercised to be won or preserved. Our liberty, our rights aren't abstract ideas. They come into being and they get protected by laws as individual people try to exercise them. Now, this is a very odd comparison, but hear me out. Aggressively exercising a legal right is the strategy of gun advocates. While it seems strange to see people carrying their guns around in very, very safe places, they're doing it to exercise what they see as a right. That public display of gun ownership makes a lot of us uncomfortable for a whole slew of reasons, but they found an effective strategy. Exercising a right is a necessary piece of defending it. A handful of us this week participated in the 4th of July parade in Lake Forest, and we exercised a little tiny bit of our right of religious expression. We handed out 1,000 flyers in that parade, sharing our message of the inherent worth and dignity of every person and the fundamental bond that unites us. To be honest, it felt awkward at first, at least it did to me, handing these flyers out to complete strangers. But after we got through a couple of blocks, it changed from being awkward to being a whole lot of fun. Only a couple of people refused our offering. We were actually really disappointed near the end of the parade when we ran out of flyers, partly because it was our advertising tool, but mostly because handing them out to attendees at the parade was a lot of fun. As we move to Lake Forest, we'll have more opportunities to exercise our religious liberty and to share our faith with others. As I was writing this week, I realized that as a religious minority, as a non-Christian faith tradition, when we exercise our religious liberty, we're helping defend the rights of our Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, and Baha'i neighbors to also practice their faith freely. Our Universalist forebears struggled to establish religious liberty in the United States. And for centuries, both Unitarians and Universalists were persecuted. They were run out of their homes and humiliated for the faith that they espoused. Today, fortunately, we understand that it's a basic right. We support the political structures that guarantee the right to practice our faith the way we choose. Sometimes, though, it seems within our congregations, religious liberty is celebrated with a little less gusto. In fact, sometimes it feels that our behavior falls short of what we demand of political institutions. We cannot hold the world to an expectation that we're not willing to uphold ourselves. In our conversations about beloved community, I've said repeatedly that building compassionate, curious, diverse community inside our congregation is a pathway to building it out there in the world. The same rule applies to religious liberty. One of the most important steps to creating a world that's curious and respectful about religious diversity is to build a faith community where we feel free to talk about our belief. Not just what you believe in general, but what we believe in particular as individuals. I want to close today's sermon talking a little bit about my own faith. You may find that it resonates with your experience. You might find that it sounds utterly foolish to you. That's not the point. The point is, there's value in sharing with one another what we believe. It's an opportunity to find that maybe we're not alone in our ideas, And it's an opportunity to deepen our own faith by contrasting it with our neighbors. So my theology is actually very simple. I believe in a goodness that shows up sometimes. It shows up as something extra. It's a goodness that's greater than could be expected from the resources in the particular situation. This goodness shows up and it offers opportunities for healing, for growth, for creativity. Occasionally it's bold, but usually it's very subtle, unperceivable even. Sometimes I call that extra goodness God, but not always. When I'm afraid or sad, it can be hard to find or even remember that the goodness is there. Other times, I'm much more attuned to it. I notice God. I notice when other people respond to God. It's beautiful. It's humbling. Sometimes I pray. These prayers are very simple and very short, with just a few parts. Typically, my prayer starts with gratitude, and then I ask for courage for the day, and I ask for an awareness of the sacred that is sometimes so hard to see. Like I said, this is a very simple faith. None of this was learned in graduate theological studies. I found some better words to describe it, but basically, this is the faith from my childhood. Sometimes that seems immature and naive, but usually it's enough. For several different reasons, sharing our beliefs with one another is scary for Unitarian Universalists. Speaking of our beliefs is sharing a piece of ourselves. It's a very deeply held piece that doesn't often see the light of day. It makes us vulnerable. And if we don't feel like we have the right words, describing it makes us scared about feeling foolish. Religion is dangerous stuff. People have been killed for it. People are still killed for it in some parts of the world. But if religious liberty is a value that we uphold, then I invite you to consider exercising it. Consider moving beyond your comfort zone, sharing that vulnerable piece of yourself. You may be surprised by the number of nodding heads and the compassionate curiosity that awaits you. Amen.